Next on our agenda, and I do apologize that we're running behind, and we appreciate everybody for sticking with us, but we do think that this is going to be a very interesting presentation. We have Craig W and Chuck Sampson from the Covington FBI office who's going to talk about public corruption.
Good morning. I do see the irony of myself as a federal public official providing a presentation for good governance in light of the government shutdown. So I thank you for your time. I appreciate the invitation because what myself and Chuck Sampson do is throughout the year, we try to go out and do outreach with a lot of the government officials at the state and local level, just to introduce ourselves and to kind of understand how the local government works. We want to know what's normal and what's irregular, and we'll get into some of the things that we see. First off, about our office. My name is Craig W. I'm the supervisor of the Covington Resident Agency, and Chuck Sampson is a special agent who takes the point in a lot of our public corruption cases. We are a satellite office out of the Louisville division, so we work closely with Cincinnati, but we're technically part of Louisville. We're not that large of an office. There's only 21 people in it. There's 10 agents, 7 task force officers on our safe streets and our joint terrorism task forces, and we also have analysts and a couple of secretaries as well. Our territory is, I'll show you real quick. Our territory, if you see that brown patch on the top, is what we have. So we cover everything from Trimble County in the east all the way up to Boyd, Greenup, and Carter in the east, and Trimble County in the west. So that's 18 counties covered by 10 agents and 7 task force officers. And we investigate every violation, everything from counterterrorism, child pornography, bank robberies, healthcare fraud, public corruption, terrorism, so we do it all. And we only have really 1 or 2 people that work the public corruption piece up this way. Now luckily, our caseload of public corruption cases isn't very heavy, maybe 4 to 6 a year. And I'm kind of pleased by the fact that it's not that high, but I also understand that that might be a function of the complaints not reaching us, people not knowing how to report them. So I know that we carry that many, and of the 4 to 6 that we have, not every one goes to federal prosecution. Some of them just pan out because the complaints there's nothing to it. We may refer others to the Kentucky Attorney General's office for state prosecution, and then there's several that may come to federal prosecution. And I'd like to echo Mary Whalen's comments about Ron Epling, because I could have put everything about that case on this slide as well. And I just put a few things up here so you can see. And the first one was Kwame Kilpatrick. I'm not sure if everybody's aware of him, but he was the mayor of Detroit. And last week he was just sentenced to 28 years in jail. That's an extraordinarily long sentence for public corruption. But he's really running his own criminal enterprise while he was the mayor. I mean, racketeering, extortion, tax fraud, he had it all going on. And I think Richie Farmer's a little closer to home as well. That's probably more similar to the case of what you saw in Florence, where it was really just abused his own position for personal gain. But Kwame Kilpatrick's was a little bit different. And a few of the things we want to get out of today is I want to tell you about the mechanisms to report public corruption. Where does it go, and what do we do with it? And these cases always look pretty clear-cut. You think, oh, that's terrible. That's evident that they were doing this. But what I'd like everybody here to consider is to rewind these cases back 2 or 3 years. A few of the things that brought that down Kwame Kilpatrick is he's having an affair with a senior aide, and some people on his staff received errant texts to that effect. Other people later received texts about his communications with some of his contractors and bid rating. So my question is, put yourself in the shoes of that employee, and what would you do? I mean, what do you do? These are charismatic, successful people. I mean, you can't just really report public corruption against the mayor in Detroit when everything that you would report would go back up to him eventually. So there's got to be a way your people have to kind of know or have a feel for the system. Maybe there's a state outlet like the Kentucky Attorney General, or you can come directly to the FBI to file that type of complaint. And the thing is, the longer it goes on, the greater loss to the city. I mean, he was earning $84,000 on top of his salary. They didn't get caught on it. He operated on this for 4 or 5 years. Now, Richie Farmer, if you've seen some of the news reporting, that's almost a primer of what not to do if you're a public official. Everything from getting jobs for girlfriends, having employees doing work on your house, just taking pretty much any gift that comes through the door. That one was almost a very clear-cut case. Kwame Kilpatrick was more serious, but the first question to you is, does your agency or department have a mechanism in place? Do your employees know what to do? And the other thing is there a fear of retribution? Kwame Kilpatrick did make it known that if anybody reported his mishaps with some of his aides or with his aide, there was going to be consequences. Everything from maybe a denied promotion, internal investigation. So it was a difficult question. So just a few things. We do differentiate. The question we always get is, how do we get involved? We do take a look at scandal. One of the, I guess the best example I can offer up is, careful where I go with this, but Anthony Weiner. So he is a pure moral stumbling, no violation of criminal law or an abuse of his position. So when we get a complaint that comes to us, we'll first of all look at it and say, well, is this a scandal? Is this something that's really just going to harm that person? Or maybe it's an ethics complaint. We also look, is it just bad government? Is it a person will probably lose the election, and maybe it's just something that doesn't rise to the level of a federal public corruption case? Is it something that can be handled internally? Is there just administrative controls to put that person on leave? And then there's also the consideration of crime. We've had people, an example of a police officer that's just possibly running a mortgage fraud scheme on the side that has nothing to do with his position, isn't considered public corruption, and that person can be prosecuted for other federal crimes if the threshold's there. So we do go through a series of hurdles before we get to the federal public corruption, or the public corruption piece. We look at three types of public corruption within the FBI, and it always kind of rates between number 1 and 2 as our top criminal priorities nationally and also locally. So right now there's gangs and drugs are number 1, but public corruption is number 2. And the first one on our list is corruption of federal public officials. So we go after them first. If we find that's the type of person we want to go after and kind of vet that out to see if that's a problem or not. Second is state and local public officials, and then law enforcement corruption. So those are the 3 categories we kind of box it into. And I'm not going to go through every slide bit by bit, but these are typically, I think everybody's probably seen these over and over again, but in our experience here within Covington, embezzlement is probably the largest one of the ones we see most often. We do look at facilitation of criminal activity. We've had incidents of officers who were working with drug trafficking organizations to offer protection and take money in return. Bribery, I'd say investment is probably the number 1 offense that we see. I won't go through all these either, but this is kind of categories of public corruption. We do see in the executive or judicial corruption. I think everybody thinks about the judge that might be taking money on the side to not render a decision or obstruct justice. So those are the 3 most common ones we see, but Chuck will speak to this in a minute, but we do regulatory corruption. So we'll go out and we'll try to interview and meet with county clerks, codes inspectors, just to say, here we are, feel free to call anytime if you see anything surfaces that just seems unusual. Well, what's normal? Tell us how it works in your government, how are things supposed to flow. Law enforcement corruption is one that's probably most sensitive because we're law enforcement officers ourselves. We don't like to see it. We jump on that one pretty quickly. We don't see a lot of it, but we're always concerned there's color of law violations where maybe they just abuse somebody, or there's a lot of people that allege corruption in different departments because they didn't bring a case, or they were just maybe tased somebody or got a little ruffled when they arrested them. Voter fraud and election fraud, those are big every year. Last year in 2012, we manned a command post with the Kentucky Attorney General's office during election night. We're just trying to see anything about voting irregularities, voter suppression. We'll get to this in another slide or 2, but I know I learned, I'm not from the area, but I learned early on that one of the constant types of corruption, at least in eastern Kentucky, was the paving of someone's driveway or laying gravel down in exchange for votes. We've seen other ones with officials that offered to pay utility bills for residents in exchange for votes. So it's just some variation on that theme is what we see often with the voter or the election fraud. And I'm happy to say there weren't a lot of complaints during the presidential election. We did staff it, nothing really came out. Disaster relief fraud, economic stimulus fraud. I don't think it's a secret to say New Orleans had its share of problems in the past, but Katrina was one of the, I'd say, rat's nest as far as disaster relief fraud. The amount of fraud that took place down there was insane. And with economic stimulus fraud, if there's anything with the Brent Spence Bridge, if it gets replaced and there's federal funding coming in, we want to see where it's going, how much will come in, and we just stay close to people to see how it's going to be. So we try to get in front of that type of thing so we can catch it and figure out where it's supposed to go, who's going to control it before it comes in. Here's some things that, it's not all-inclusive, but for us, I think my favorite one is inadequate complaint handling mechanisms. We've gone out repeatedly and talked to complainants that I just didn't know the FBI investigated this, or I didn't think that it rose to the level of the FBI's attention. And they didn't even call the state police. So it really goes unreported. And we can take reports that are anonymous. You don't have to give your name at first. We'll have to go back and get more detail, but just that reluctance to report is what we're trying to overcome in our office. I think one that did come up was the lack of the size of the department. We've seen this where there's a lack of control mechanisms. You might have an outsized personality, someone who's been there a long time and has power or control over the credit cards or the travel accounts or the retirement funds. It's just way out of whack for how much money that person's supposed to handle. And that was the case we had last year where a gentleman was just a bully, frankly, and told people not to ask too many questions, and then he just continued to run up debts on credit cards for the department. So this is kind of one of the last slides I have. We go through, in addition to considering whether it's a scandal, a criminal activity, we also do monthly exchanges with the Kentucky Attorney General's office. So we'll go down for a monthly meeting and we'll kind of trade information, see what kind of complaints came in. If we get something that's not a federal case, we'll turn it over to them and say, what do you think? And they'll do vice versa. Now, left unsaid is if there's anything that's sensitive against the Kentucky state government, we can keep that in-house. Or if I'm too close to somebody's area, I can request that another agent from another office come in to conduct the investigation. So there's ways to kind of report even at the higher levels if corruption's taking place. The voter election fraud, again, this is the one that you'd see traditionally out of eastern Kentucky with Mark Hazard and down those areas with the paving of driveways, and it's really old school. And I don't know that we'll ever ferret it out. I mean, you can arrest somebody and it just seems to come back. Investment and misuse of department funds, that's kind of one we see over and over and over again as far as corruption. We don't see the quasi Kilpatrick one as much as we see just the taking in, I think with, I've seen a few Covington faces here as well with Mr. Dew. But we work that out with the Kentucky AG's office, and we decide, is this going to go federal or is it going to go state? And it all depends on the amount of loss as well. So if there's a threshold of $25,000 to $50,000, we consider taking it. If it's lower than that, perhaps it goes to the state, and it's also the sentencing guidelines. So if they're sentenced at the federal level, they're going to do 80% of the time that they're sentenced. So if they get 10 years, they're going to do the full 8. Whereas in the state, they may do a quarter of that. So that's one of the benefits of using federal prosecution is just stricter sentencing guidelines, and they'll go out of state. They won't remain in state. And we also have, we always go through the assets and try to recover whatever loss with restitution, asset forfeiture. In some of the cases that we had, they had spent everything. There was nothing left. There was nothing to seize. There was nothing to take back. So we're always on the hunt for something we can do to reimburse the victims, or at least give that department back something that they lost. Some of the mechanisms of how it comes to us, self-reporting. In the cases that we have to the credit of those departments, it was after an audit, they realized the loss, they came to us in the Eastern District of Kentucky, and we sat down and we went after it after the fact. So what happened was there was a lack of controls, and I think this comes out again and again and again. And I have on the bottom, audits, audits, audits. That's how they were caught in the cases that we have. I know none of them are foolproof, but those are the ones that traditionally we found out later on. Officials addressed this earlier with an unusually large amount of span control. And that's hard with the smaller departments because if you have one person, there just has to be a check to that person who has access to that type of money. We have complaints. Like the word whistleblower, she used the word complaint. Just will call us up out of the blue, and we'll drive out and we'll talk to that person, and we can bring them in. We don't interview them in their office where they're alleging the corruption is taking place. We do everything to kind of offer confidentiality, and we'll consult with any department here that has questions about what we can do, or maybe how it works in more detail. There's really not enough time up here to kind of go through it A to Z. Those are some of the lessons learned. Just, I think that we're missing out on some of the complaints. We could probably look at more of these if they came to us. So that's really kind of what we see on our end. Chuck's going to talk about a few of the things he's come across, and we'll take a few questions afterwards. Thank you.
Just real quickly, my name is Special Agent Chuck Sampson. I'm obviously the FBI, and Greg's my boss. Doing this for about 5 years now here in Kentucky. I just want to make sure I got up there and so you put a face to the name, so you know how I represent you guys in Northern Kentucky for the FBI. We do cover those 18 counties that Craig brought up, and it's quite a stretch. We need to go out and interview every one of the county clerks. We just want to make sure if there is voter fraud or anything going on, that they know who to call. So if you guys ever have a problem or any questions, feel free to call me. It's no problem. I'm glad to speak to anybody that has a complaint or any issues. Just give me a ring. We've got, like Craig brought up, utility bills, where they're paying for boats, kickback for construction projects. The biggest one we've ran across over and over again is embezzlement. And that's not only in public corruption, just in white-collar crime in general. There are 3 agents here in Northern Kentucky that work white-collar crime, and 2 of us that really kind of focus in on public corruption, and I'm one of them. Embezzlement seems to be the issue that keeps coming up. And what Craig was talking about was if, just so we can be clear, if you looked at U.S. Title 18 U.S. Code 666, and I'm not making that up, that is for public corruption. And what it says is if for an agent of an organization, whether that be the state or local or any kind of tribal government, and you steal a property over $5,000, and you receive an excess of $10,000 in a federal program, and that could be anything like a grant, contract, subsidy loan, guarantee insurance, any of that, and you receive that in a 12-month period, that can be prosecuted on a federal level. Right? What we look for in reality, when you get to the sentencing guidelines, when we go up in front of the judge and we bring this to prosecution, is that you're looking for a threshold of $25,000 is what we kind of focus on, because that's going to put you in jail. Any other, if you're below that, you're going to do time at home. You're not going to actually go to federal prison. So we like to work the ones that are $25,000 and up. And we're really trying to be more proactive. We do attend the monthly meeting, the Public Corruption Working Group, which consists of the AG's office, the Auditor of Public Accounts, Kentucky State Police, IRS, State Treasurer's office. They're all there, and we really do. We break it down and we say, how can we tackle this in the best manner? How can we be the most efficient in prosecuting this if we're going to take it state or take it federal? And really, the big difference is you're looking at, if you go to federal prison, you're doing 85% of the time there. So you're not walking away with doing like a quarter of that time and doing probation. You're going to do 85%. Public corruption, it starts off like, it's like wildfire. Always seems to start off small, whether it's double dipping in reimbursements for travel. You're using your credit card inappropriately, and then they're like, I can get away with that. I can do that. So let's see what else I can get away with, and it ends up escalating, and it ends up being a huge amount. When your CPA, when you hire your CPA to come and do that audit, he's looking at the well-being of the organization. He's not focusing on the small stuff. So it might, checks and balances is the key to success when you're trying to find people that are defrauding you. So make sure to look at the small stuff. Subjects always say, and I've done several interviews with these guys with white-collar crime and public corruption. They say, well, Chuck, how are we going to pay it back? I'm like, oh, you just considered it like a loan. And like for you to pay your college tuition or your mortgage. Yeah, Chuck, I was going to pay it back. And I said, well, how much do you think you took? I took about 50,000. And then it turns out to be more like 250,000. It always seems to be the case. It's like you just triple or quadruple that amount, whatever they tell you. It's very consistent in that matter. And it's always starts small and always gets big. So if you can catch it fast, report it, or do something about it quickly before it gets to a bigger problem. I think that's about it, right, Craig? That's our politician's creed right there. Not anything you can't wait, that's about it. If there's any questions, Craig and I are here to address them if you have anything for us. Okay, thank you for your time.